Thank you. Yeah, well, we're here tonight to tell some stories, and the stories that we have tonight are I titled "Stories of Key West," and also those that were forgotten by the island. So stories of the island have forgotten, and so. And the reason I said that is because over the years I've done a lot of work at the city cemetery, and my father used to work over there, and I'd go around and see headstones and people that had passed, and I'd ask my mother when I'd go home, I'd say, what about this person? Well, that person did this or that, but nobody even remembers them anymore, So a lot of these stories, I use a reference, my mother, who's 94 years old, and she still lives in the same house on 820 Simonton, and my uncle, who on April 28th will be 104. He was born in Key West in 1919, and he's sharp, his mind's sharp, and he's told me these incredible stories, whether truthful or fictional. He's told me these stories. So that's what we're doing here tonight. So one of the stories that I'm going to start with tonight is during the Depression, the very first part of the Depression. I would say it was 1931 or so. And, times were pretty bad in Key West, and they had, of course, fish. A lot of you have heard the grits and grunts tales. That's what people ate, and the locals would fish the grunts, and then I think the government provided grits, but a lot of people still wanted to eat meat and stuff. So whether wrong or right or whatever the case, a lot of the locals went hunting, and the place they hunted was in Big Pine Key, and they hunted the key deer. And my uncle, my mother's uncle, was one of these gentlemen that would go up on weekends or whatever during the season and go hunting. Now, he was an amazing carpenter, built a lot of the homes, older homes in Key West, or remodeled them. But he was a terrible hunter, terrible. But his friends liked his company, and he was comical, so they'd take him along. And the other thing about him was that he had his wife, and his wife, Estella, she was just like overbearing. And my mother would say that her uncle was a little bit henpecked, everything she wanted. He said, "Yes, Estella, yes, I'll do this." And so she would make him sit outside in a patio there, and whenever his friends came over, she would, give him a hard time about it. "Oh, your friends, and they smell, and they're rowdy, and yes, Estella, I'll tell them to stay outside," or whatever the case. "I won't put my feet on the chairs," and so on and so forth. But so one day they were planning this hunting trip, and one of his friends came along and said, and his name was Emilio. He said, "Emilio, I have this cat that I just got from the docks, down at Mallory Square, and this ship's captain gave it to us, and I thought maybe you'd want it, maybe bring you some luck or whatever." Or he said, "You know what? I'll take the cat because I have a rat problem around the house, and my wife's always, yeah, give me the cat." So he took the cat, and he named the cat Sebastian. He said, I don't know why the hell he named him, but he named him Sebastian. And he put the cat around the house, but the cat was no good. The cat would fall asleep, and the cat would be inside the house, and his wife hated the cat. So when his friend said, "Okay, well, we're going to go hunt," he says, "Listen, I'm going to take the cat with me." "You take the cat with you?" He says, "Yeah, I'm going to take the cat with me, and, we have him around the camp and see what he..." "All right, well, bring him on." And so they took him up to Big Pine, and the night before they went on this hunt, they were all talking and drinking and whatever the case, and all these guys had these prize dogs that could hunt deer, you know. Emilio brings a cat, you know. He says, what the hell? He says, well, I'll tell you guys something. He says, I'm going to wager with you guys, you know, 50 cents. They didn't have much money, $1, 25 cents, that my cat can hunt. And they all said, man, that cat can't hunt. But you know what, we're going to do that. We're going to wager that. So the next morning, everybody gets ready, and Emilio grabs his cat and grabs his shotgun or whatever the case. And he knew this one spot where he knew the deer would go by there. And he sat there, and they started to hunt. He can hear the dogs coming and barking and stuff. And man, all of a sudden, the deer jumps out in front of Emilio, and Emilio gets the cat, and boom, the cat jumps up on the deer, and it runs out towards the beach. And the guys shoot at the deer, and bam, the deer falls. And they were all amazed. And they were like, how that cat just, you know, got that deer to jump. Well, anyways, the cat was the, you know, he was the charm of the party. And I didn't put him here because I guess he was hiding, because that cat wasn't, you know, he was always sleeping. So anyways, that evening they all got together. They gave him the best cut of the meat, and they all paid him their 50 cents or whatever. He said, Emilio, that cat's amazing. When we get back to Key West, we're going to tell everybody about that cat. So they get back to Key West, and he takes the cat and puts him around the house or whatever. But that morning, the cat slips into the darn house and gets on his wife's bed. So he's out there in the patio like always, and his wife says, you know, you sit out there. And his friends come by, and they brought a group of people, and he was like, man, what are all these people? He said, man, they come to see that cat. He said, cat? He says, yeah, they want to see it, and this guy wants to take the cat hunting with him, and this guy will pay you to take pictures. This guy, and we bought the guy from the newspaper, and he's going to take pictures. And the guy brought fish. He said, look, I got fish for you and the cat, and, you know, I got milk. And so he says, okay, let me go get the cat. So he goes inside the house, looks all over the place, and he can't find the cat. And so he tells his wife, Estella, where's my cat? Where's Sebastian? And she says, oh, man, this morning that darn cat was on my bed, and I had it with him. I grabbed him, walked him right down Olivia Street, and threw him in a yard over there in a big house that's over there. But you gave my cat away. He says, yeah. He says, but I got all these people in there. Well, he goes back outside. He says, guys, look, the cat's gone. She gave the cat away. Oh, man, we're so sorry, Emilio. And they left. And, you know, everybody was like, man, that cat was something. Well, about 2 weeks later, they come to see him to see how he was doing. And he was outside, and he had a glass of wine and some fresh tostones there. And his buddies came, and he says, sit down. He says, yeah, how about your wife? You know, she doesn't like us. No, sit down. Sit wherever you want. I said, all right. And so they sat down, and I said, Emilio, what's going on, you know, and what's with you? And he says, watch. He says, you know, remember the cat, right? He says, yeah. He said, that cat's the laziest thing, wasn't, you know, he'd sleep and stuff. He says, but the day we went hunting, I came up with this plan. When you all were chasing the deer, I grabbed that damn cat and threw him on the deer's back, and, you know, and he chased him out there. But I didn't give a damn about the cat. You know, he was okay, but, you know, so. But when my wife found out that everybody wanted to give me fish and milk and wine because they wanted to see the cat, she felt so bad that she had gotten rid of the cat that now she treats me like a king. He said, well, what do you mean? He says, watch. He says, Stella. He said, the guys are here. Bring them a couple glasses of wine. He says, okay, darling. She come out and put it there. Anything else? He says, yeah, make some tostones. Thank you, baby. He said, all right, I'll do it. He says, what? He says, yeah, look. Remember my clothes were always wrinkled and she wouldn't wash? He said, look, I'm pressed. He says, man, Emilio, you are a happy man. He says, yep, and that's a happy cat because I gave him to the Hemingways and now they're have plenty other cats. So, that cat can't hunt. The next story we have is B-29. And I might have told this story last year. And some of these stories, you know, this was the time, you know, that these things, the locals did that. And, you know, here in Key West, we had the Conks. And the Conks, to us, were of Bahamian descent or English descent. And they lived on the north side of the island. And then the Hispanics or the Cuban were Cayuesanos or Key Westers, and that's what we consider ourselves. And then we had, you know, the African American community in Bahama Village. But many of these people got together and had rooster fights or cockfights. So in the 1950s, this gentleman he had a place where they would fight the roosters down on Amelia Street off of Duval, and never had any luck. Another one that never had any luck with roosters and stuff. So one day after he had lost his money and everything else, he was taking a walk up Duval Street. And somewhere between the La Di Da and Truman Avenue, he saw he was walking and he grabbed it and he looked at the little bird, and there was a bingo parlor there, and somebody yelled B29 or something, you know, he thought it was, and he named the bird B29. And you know, he raised that bird from that and trained it and trained it to, you know, and that's the irony of it. You know, he loved that bird, but he would put it up as a gladiator, you know, that was his bird. So B29 became a champion. Nobody could beat 29. B29. They would bring roosters from Puerto Rico and Havana and stuff, and he'd beat them all. And when he found out strangers were in town, he'd put the bird in his bedroom to sleep with him and his wife because he thought they would steal it. So you know, and his name was Wayne Garcia. So towards the end of B29's career, they brought a rooster from Havana, and it was the feared Havana Red. And I think Corey's got a picture of the feared Havana Red. There he is. And man, and Havana Red had never lost a fight in Havana. And fearless bird. And so they arranged the rooster fight. Everybody in Key West came, and they even put it out on the newspaper, whatever, big rooster fight. And this was the 1950s, so I guess it was okay to do that. But and the two birds had this fight. And man, they fought and fought. But at the end, B29 was triumphant. And he had beaten the Havana Red. So Wayne Garcia, he said, you know what, I'm going to put the bird out to pasture. And he took him to the city cemetery. And he did him. And every evening he'd go and feed the bird white rice and black beans or whatever the heck. And the bird started, you know, to have little birds, and he went and feed. And so the guy who told me the story, he was at the cemetery, and he was an older man, and he was telling me the story about B29. And his daughter had told him he had to move up to Central Florida with her, and he wasn't going to be able to feed the chickens at the graveyard. And he says, you know, and I bring, every time, if my wife has black beans or rice or whatever, I bring it over here and I feed because they're all descendants of B29. So you know, we talked and he went on. About a month later, I saw my wife Angie, and she was making, you know, steak and white beans and rice. I said, save me some of that white beans and white rice and black beans, because that's for the things. And so B29, that was the story of B29. Okay, we have a gentleman here, and this was in the 60s, early part of right after the revolution in Cuba, whatever the case. A lot of Cubans, we used to call them the Cuban refugees, they came to Key West. And so this gentleman came probably 1964, 65 from Cuba. And his name was, and I believe it was Juan Blanco. And he was a great fisherman in Cuba and knew how to fish. So when he got here, he didn't have anything. He didn't even have hardly any money to buy a rowboat, much less a boat. But some people got together and got him a boat, and he started to fish and to crawfish. And one time they told him about this wreck that was out off the Northwest Channel. He says, man, that wreck, certain time of year, there's dozens and dozens of crawfish or lobster. But nobody will dive that, and he used to dive for it. He says, because there's a big tiger shark that goes along there. And the tiger shark, nobody's going to go in there. So Blanco, he says, you know what? I got something figured out. He says, I'm going to go and I'm going to catch me a big, a bonito or something, big fish. And I'm going to cast that fish at another spot and wait till that shark comes. And when I see that shark feeding on that big fish, I'm going to go back to the wreck and dive up the lobsters. So he came up with this plan. And I think there's a picture of him, there's a carving of him out there in the middle of, Corey, if you have the next one, of him. No, that's a thing of fish that he had. There he is, And the little skiff was called La Pedra, which means the dog. I don't know why. But I guess you'll figure out that. But anyways, there's the fin of the tiger shark. He got the tiger shark to go one place. He went back to the wreck, dove up and dove and dove, and filled the skiff to the top with lobsters. And he goes back to the fish house and he takes, and they're like amazed. How the heck did you? He said, well, the shark, I got him to go here. So one guy says, man, that guy is about the best fisherman I've ever seen. He's like a cat. The other one said, el gato, which means cat. And he says, yeah, like a gato. Well, that was his nickname forever. And one of the things they would say about el gato was you could throw him in a tub of water and he'd come up with a dozen crawfish. El gato. And his boat was called La Pedra, which is the dog. So, gato. I think we have the next one over, which would be, so this carving I did a few years back of, this is, I would say Emma Street downtown, and good friend of mine's, Corey McIntosh, he was born and raised here, and again, one of the best fishermen I've ever fished with. And he would go fishing on the weekends, and one day he invited me to go fishing. He said, Wayne, you want to come fishing with me? I said, yeah, of course, He says, well, we'll go fishing and get the boat, put it on the, had it on the trailer and took it and went out fishing. Fished at least till in the afternoon. So when we finished fishing, he said his first mate, which sitting in the back of the truck there, his nickname was Bubbles. And he says, we'll get Bubbles to sit in the back of the truck. And I said, Corey, why do you call him Bubbles? He says, Wayne, there's people that when they talk, they make bubbles with their, always. He can't help it. There's no bubbles coming out of his mouth. And they take him to parties so the kids can see the bubbles coming out of his mouth. So Corey and I and Bubbles went fishing, and when we got back, Corey set the cooler up on the bow of the boat. And the boat was named after his daughter, Tekoya. And so we leave the boat ramp at Garrison Bight, and we go down Truman, and then, I see that he lived on Julia Street. I see he turns right on Whitehead. I said, Corey, don't you live that way? He said, well, Wayne, goes all the way down Whitehead Street. He turns left and goes down Angela, goes into Thomas and goes up. I said, okay, well, we're going towards your house. But then he turns right again and goes up Emma Street. I said, Corey, what the hell are you doing? He said, Wayne, watch. Man, all of a sudden he said, look behind the truck. And everybody in the neighborhood was following the boat. It was like Corey's fish parade. I mean, they were like, hey, Corey went fishing today, And his nickname, they call him Ching over there. He's got various nicknames, but one of them is Ching. Ching went fishing. And they all come out and on the bow, hey, okay, save me some fish. And everyone, even one of his ex-wives, with the, Corey, I want my child support. But anyways, so we head over to his house. And some years before that, I poured him a big driveway slab, concrete. And he says, now watch this, Wayne. And so we set the cooler on the driveway slab there, and he hoses it down with water. And he says, watch one. And everyone came, and they opened the gate. And his mother comes out, and he sits his mother on a chair, gives her a bunch of, little plastic bags from Winn-Dixie or whatever. And he says, now look. And he gets like that, and he kicks that damn cooler over with ice, and the fish are still jumping and, grunts and lane snappers. He says, now, he says, you get 5 grunts for $3. Not one more or one less. My mother's going to, bag them up for you. And man, pick up the fish and put them in the bag. And And one guy got 4. He said, hey, you got 6 grunts there. Put that. And matter of fact, you're gone. Next in line, sir. And he sold every single fish there. And so, I see him from time to time. And a while back, I told him, I said, Corey, I bought a boat. He says, you bought a boat? I said, yeah. And I got these davit things, put in my house, and because I live on the canal there on Riviera. And I got the boat on the davits, and, let's go fishing. He says, that's great, Wayne. He says, the boat? I said, yeah, I got a new engine, and it's good, it's comfortable. He says, let me ask you something. I said, what's that, Corey? He says, did you buy a trailer? He said, we got to ride that thing around. I'm not going to sell the fish. Corey's Fish Parade. Corey's Fish Parade. So I know that this is a story that has come back to the mainstream and stuff. And the story's about a gentleman that was a friend of my grandfather's and a friend of many people in Key West. And his nickname was El Ileño, Manuel Cabeza, and he was this would have been in the 1921, I believe it was, or so. And he was like a Paul Bunyan in Key West. He was the hero of the Spanish community. If you had to have something lifted or moved, because he was a big guy and he was strong. If you had a problem with the neighbor, he'd go talk to him, and he was great. And everybody loved the Ileño. Everybody loved him. Good-looking man, but he was a little bit of a rascal, and he would frequent the sporting houses and the bars and stuff. But he had this rival in town, and his rival was a gentleman by the name of Decker. And Decker hated the Ileño because and Decker was a big guy, strong and everything else, but everything that Decker did, Ileño did better. And everything that everybody who loved Ileño hated Decker, and it was a rivalry, And so things have it that both of them liked the same girl, And she was a beautiful, beautiful African American girl, beautiful, and Decker liked and Ileño liked her, but she liked Ileño more. She always liked him, So Decker was he was eaten up by jealousy and stuff, and so one day he gets all his buddies together, and whether or not they were Ku Klux Klan or not, that night they dressed like it. See, they put the things in the cape, and they went looking for Ileño. And man, they found him off of Whitehead Street. And he fought them off. There was 5 or 6 of them. He fought them off pretty good, but finally, Decker had a little pistol in his pocket, and he hit Ileño in the back of the head and knocked him out. And then they beat him up, And so someone found the Ileño. He was all beat up, broken arm, and they took him to I think it was the Gailey Hospital, or a hospital was here in town. And Ileño stayed there about a week or 2, or how long it was, until he mended, but he still had the broken arm on his right arm. So they were going to release him from the hospital, and so he calls a friend of his that had a taxi company here in Key West. I think it was Navarro, and he says, come and get me and give me a ride home. He says, okay, I'll come and pick you up. And so Navarro picks up the Ileño, and they're driving down Duval Street. And he says, go by the Cuban Club, because there's a little house next to it, and Decker sometimes hangs out there. And damn if they go down Duval Street, and he sees Decker right in the front porch. Well, he knew Navarro hid a little pistol underneath his seat. So he jumps out the cab, rolls up to Decker, and pow, and shoots him right between the eyes. One shot, Decker's dead. So he jumps back in the cab and he tells Navarro, take me to my buddy's house. And his buddy was a gentleman by the name of Rafael Solano, and my wife's great-grandfather. And he had the house that's on the corner of Petronia and Whitehead, which I think there's a little restaurant there, and then the house with the big cupola next to it. And so he said, take him because he'll hide me out, And so takes him to the house, and Solano says, yeah, come on upstairs, and we hit him up in the attic. But all the town knew that he was hiding there, so the police came, and it's Key West. I mean, there's only one taxi in town, and you took the taxi to the hell are you going to go in a taxi, But anyways, he hid up, and so everybody showed up, and they said, Solano, give us the Eleño, give him. And he knew, man, if they get him, they're gonna lynch him or kill him. He says, I won't release him unless the federal marshals come. And plus, Eleño was a veteran. He says, or the MPs from the base, if they want to come and get him. Well, they concocted something where some of Decker's guys or whoever dressed up like MPs or whatever and said, look, they're here, they're taking him to jail. So they surrendered and they took him to jail. Well, that night was December 24th, 1921. And man, I don't have to tell you the story. They got him and they did all kind of things, and they shot him 12 times. And they left him on Flagler Avenue, either hanging on a tree or whatever. And the next day, some people found him and they told the community. And that was Christmas Day. And so, they took him, and Christmas was not celebrated that year in Key West. And a friend of mine told me that story. I didn't know that part, but they did not celebrate Christmas because in the Hispanic community, because they were so saddened by his death. The guys who supposedly killed him or whatever had horrible deaths. They died. One got hit by the train that came to Key West. Another one drowned fishing. The other one got electrocuted. And they called it the curse of the Eleño, and they all got... But that story was, when I was a kid, my mother and my uncle would tell me this story about the Eleño. And, but when, I think it was years and years ago, I was doing a small job back in town. I think it was off of Emma Street. And this gentleman came out to the porch, and he was older already, and he introduced himself, and his name was Kaluka. And he asked me my name, and I told him, my name's Wayne Garcia. And he said, well, who's your family? Key West people do that. When they meet, they said, who's your family? And so I told him, my mother's from the Hernandez and this. I said, and my wife's family is the Solanos and the Solano. He says, oh, Solano. So he told me the story about the Eleño. And as he told me the story, he kept on referring to me as Solano. And I said, well, but Kaluka, my name's Garcia. He said, okay, Solano, but let me tell you about this part. He told me this amazing story about the Eleño. And at the end, he said, Garcia, and he whispered this to me. He says, don't ever tell anybody this story until the day I die. And I said, I won't. And I said, but you can call me Solano. And he says, okay. And I never, he died some years later. But the Eleño was frequent. This is the Square Deal grocery store on Simonton and Olivia. I think it might be a spa now or whatever. And at one time it was called the Bodega. And so, but when I was a kid, it was a Square Deal. And the Eleño would frequent this store, and that's the best image I had of him. This lady here, she was like what they called an old maid. She never got married, and she was related to one of the families here in Key West. But she was always immaculately dressed. And, if she had a yellow dress, she had the yellow shoes and the yellow umbrella. And if the next day was green, she'd have the same setup. So I put her in that carving, So she was from that time when I was a kid there. So, thank you. So now that we have the Square Deal here, there was a a lady that worked there. She was the cashier, the cashier, the one that the attendant there, and her name was Mechi, and she was a neighbor of ours on Simonton Street. And Mechi, when she was young, she was a conga dancer, the conga lines that they had, or that they do nowadays. And she was an amazing dancer, and she would. She would play music at her house when she was younger, and we'd hear it and stuff. But then there was a few years there where she stopped playing the music, and she had gotten older. And her other thing was that she would write the numbers. And it was an illegal bolita, you go into her house, and she'd write your numbers for you. And the damnedest thing, she had talking about cats, she had a black cat. And I said, Mechi, how are you selling numbers for the lottery, and you got a black cat in here, But that was what she did. And so we'd go fishing. And time I went fishing, when it got back to Simonton, we would, getting the fish out the cooler and stuff. And my son was little. He was pulling the fish out and throwing them out all over the place. And she came around the corner and she says, hey, did you guys catch any grunts? And I said, Mechi, today I don't know if we caught any grunts. I see, snappers in there, and but you can have a few snappers, or, she says, no, I wanted to get some grunts. So I said, well, I don't think we got any. So she was starting to walk off, and my son puts his hand all the way in the bottom of the cooler, and he says, Dad, is this a grunt? I said, yeah. I said, Mechi, look, we got one. And she says, oh, great. Then he did it again, and before you know it, he pulled out 4 or 5 grunts and gave them to Mechi. And she took them. And she told us, when she was young, they would fry the whole grunt, and she would, and she would have people come over and other dancers that danced with her in the conga line, and she started reminiscing. So she goes back to the house, and a little while later, we hear some music coming from Mechi's house, and and it's Cuban music, and I tell, I think my brother was with me, I said, you hear the music? He says, yeah, it's coming from Mechi's house. And he says, no, but can you smell it? He says, she's frying fish. Man, and she was dancing. We went and we saw her dancing in the house, and she had frying fish. And, I think she even put the old shoes that she had when she would dance the conga line on and stuff. And so every time I'd go fishing after that, and before she passed away, I'd go by her house, and I said, Mechi, I got some grunts. And man, she'd be happy as heck. So she was she worked over there at the bodega. But her claim of fame was she was probably the best conga dancer back in the day, So, I'm gonna drink a little bit of water here. If you really want to hear me tell me stories, put a bottle of rum there, and I'll take some. But the next story. It's probably the 1960s, and it's a story about the city cemetery and stuff, and I named it the Bunny Man. And so the Bunny Man, and see if we have the image of the city cemetery, because by the way, this is 820 Simonton, where I grew up, and my mother's house, and my grandfather had a little book stand next to it, which was torn down. This was Laina's house, our neighbor, and then Mechi's house was over here. And sometimes Mechi and Laina would have a feud. They wouldn't talk to each other. They just wouldn't, they pretended they didn't even exist. But Mechi spoke to my mother, my grandmother, and Laina did. So Mechi would have to try to talk over Laina to talk to me. Back and forth. Finally, she figured out, I'm just going to tell Laina, listen, you bitch, tell them over there that But the damnedest thing, that Mechi rented from Laina, so one time a month she had to speak to her. She had to take the rent to her. And this is Simonton Street. And some of the characters that we had around the neighborhood at that time. Santiago, the man with the dogs. Santiago was like a self-proclaimed veterinarian, and he knew how to cure the dogs. There wasn't any veterinarians in Key West that I know of, but Santiago knew how to fix the dogs up. Always had a bunch of dogs around him, so you could take your dog to him and he'd fix something up for him, and I had my mother's cousin, my godfather Angel, and he's got his bicycle. He'd go to Fausto every day. Every day. And every day my mother said, okay, bring me some bread or bring me some eggs. And I asked my mother, do you like go grocery shopping? And back then it was like, no, we just buy whatever we need. I guess the refrigerators weren't that good, so you couldn't keep so much in there. And we have Miami, and I've told the story about Miami. Miami was he was a cigar maker, but he was also a lector. He would read in the cigar companies. And they put this one person to read novels or news and stuff. And that's what his job was. He'd read. And when we were kids, he'd come by the house on Saturdays, early Saturday mornings, and he'd talk to my brother and I, and he'd tell my brother, you know, I always see you with a book in your hand, and someday you're going to be a lawyer, you know. And my brother's a lawyer. And then he would tell me, and you, redhead, you're always on top of your father's truck playing with the tools, and someday you're going to be a builder. And that's what I'm a builder. He was like a fortune teller. I don't know. He knew shit. You know? Miami knew stuff. And then he'd tell us about these travels all over the world. Paris and England and the Great Wall of China. And we'd be like, damn, Miami, you know, he gets around everywhere. And so when he'd get ready to leave, he'd say, you know, bye to my mother, and my grandmother, Mitchie and Lane. And we'd ask him, where are you going? And he said, I'm going to Miami, but I'll be back next week. And that's why his nickname, you know, he always said, I'm going to Miami. And Miami was something else. You know, years later, and that's part of, you know, that mystique of Simonton Street in my neighborhood and stuff. Years and years later, we were grown, my kids, my son was little, and my nephew and stuff. And my brother and I were sitting on the porch, and we were talking about Key West and this and that. And you know, talking about whatever. And we see this old guy come by. Old man, white shirt, rolled up sleeves with a straw hat. And we look at each other and said, who does that remind you of? And we say, yeah, Miami. But, you know, Miami's been dead 25 years or 30 years, you know. And he went along the sidewalk, and I see him talking to my son and my nephew. And I'm like, look, what does that remind you? He said, man, that reminds me of Miami. Man, he'd talk to us, and, you know. So when he walks off, I asked my son, Gregory, I said, Gregory, what did that old man want? He says, oh, Dad, I don't know. He was on his way to Miami, so. Miami. Thank you. So I think we have one of the, yeah, there you go. And this carving of the city cemetery, I did it years ago and gave it to a friend of mine, Carol Rispoli. I guess she's here tonight. And again, my father, he was a builder, but he also built eternal homes. He built graves, you know, and stuff. And I think that's my brother. He worked with him for a while before he went off to college. And so that's the city cemetery. Well, you know, probably late 60s, Key West Citizen runs an article or whatever. He said, and it was like, you know, strange character seen running around the graveyard at night, you know. People referring to him as the Bunny Man. I said, what the hell is that? He dressed in white, you know, and so... there was a guy that worked there and stuff, and he knew all the stories of the graveyard. And I asked him one day, I said, do you know, what remember back in the 60s, the thing about the Bunny Man? And they were seeing the Bunny Man everywhere. Down at the Mallory Square, Bunny Man was uptown. And he says, well, you know, I'll tell you the story. He said, it was this guy, you know, and he lived off of Grinnell Street or whatever the case. And his wife, you know, he would do, again, one of these men, and he was great. Anything that she wanted, he tried to do for her. And one day she came to him and she says, you know, there's this house in front of the city cemetery, and I'm in love with that house. I need to have that house. I want you to go to knock on the door where those people live, and I want you to ask them, will you sell me that house? He says, okay, darling, I'll go. So that Friday evening or whatever, he goes up and knocks on the door, and older couple live there, and the lady comes out, and he says, you know, I'm so-and-so, and my wife loves this house, and I wanted to find out if you'd be interested in selling it. I give you a fair price. And then the lady says, oh, no. She says, this house has been in my family for a while, and we're going to move. We're going to go up Miami or whatever. He said, but we're going to give it to our kids, and they can do what they want to with it. They can rent it or whatever the case. The guy says, okay, I understand. So he goes back to his wife, and he says, they don't want to sell the house. You know, they're gonna, oh no, I gotta have that house. I gotta have that house. So he was tired of hearing every day, did you talk? And, well, so one day he grabs a Sears Roebuck catalog, and he's looking for some kind of thing, and he sees this outfit, and it was like this big, huge bunny outfit. So back then, I think you would go on Simonton Street, and Sears and Roebuck would had a little place where you go inside and you'd order everything. There was no Sears here; it was just a catalog place. And so he'd go in there, and he ordered his suit, and he came up with this plan. He says, you know, in the evenings, I'll put this damn suit on, and I'll go run around, and the older people, they sat on their porch every evening. And so he jumped out there and jumped on top of graves and running around and. Oh, they were petrified. They were like, didn't you see it? So, you know, that's how the story got around town. Bunny Man, you know, so, damn it. And before you know it, he goes and back to their house, and he says, remember I came by here a month ago or whatever, and you see, oh man, we'll sell, we're out of here. We want to sell. There's a ghost over there or something, of an old rabbit or what the hell it was, but he said, well, I'm going to give you a fair price. And they sold, and man, he gave the wife, they moved in and they fixed the house, and she was so happy. She was like, I love you. How did you manage that? How did you get that house? And he said, well, you know, it's something I had to do. But anyways, so one day he was sitting on the porch, and he was having a cold beer and you know, relaxing, and he sees her come out, and she had this look on her face, and he was like, what is it? What's going on? She says, oh, there's this house on Newton Street that I just gotta. I wonder if I still got that bunny suit. So that brings us to this one. It's the 1970s, and it's the best damn lawyer in Key West. Best damn lawyer. Graduated high school in 1978, and you know, things were slow in Key West. There was, you know, some work. My father was doing work at the cemetery or whatever. My brother was his helper, and I told him, you know what, Dad, I'll go and I'll find a job. I'll get another job, you know, until things pick up. And so there was a program that the government put in under Jimmy Carter or whatever, and it's called the CETA program. And there was a youth CETA program, and that's what I got in. And they put me to work out at the out of Stock Island. There used to be the county building there, and I was working at the engineering department there. And so one day there, the head engineer says, you know, Wayne, I'm going to send you down to the courthouse, and I need you to do some research, and I'll tell you what the research on some stuff that the county's going to do, and engineering department needs the information. I said, yeah, I'll go. And, you know, I was young. And so I go over there, and he's looking up records and stuff. And so worked there a week or two, and one day I brought my lunch, and I was looking for a place to have lunch. And this older man, he comes out, and he says, you want to have lunch inside? He had like a room there, you know, and there are different things. I said, yeah, I'll sit there with you. And same thing, he asked me who my family was, and I told him, you know, Key West, and he told me a little bit about himself. And we kind of became friends, you know. I'd eat lunch there, and one day I asked him, I said, you know, I see all these attorneys here, and they come in and out and well-dressed. And who's the best one? Who's the best one there? And he says, well, for me, none of those guys. He said, there was this one guy. He's a young man, and when he was young, he wasn't, I don't know, he had to leave school early. Whether he wasn't, you know, he wasn't too smart or whatever the case, he had to leave school. So they got him a job at the courthouse there. But he loved to read. He was a voracious reader, and his mother was also, you know, taught him how to read. And so every chance he'd get, this young man would go into the law library there and read, and he wanted to be a lawyer so bad. And he'd go home and he'd tell his father and mother, I want to be a lawyer someday. I want to be a lawyer. So his father got some old cigar boxes and some old wood and made him a little briefcase, you know, just to entertain him, and put his initials on it and stuff. And gave it to him and said, take this to work tomorrow. So he would take his little briefcase with him. But somebody got a hold of it. His friends teased him, and they wrote "lawyer boy" on it. And so, lawyer boy, So that became his nickname. Hey, there comes lawyer boy, So he worked there, and and he read. And one day, this guy comes over to the house after work and asked the parents, your son, he was over there at the courthouse. He's with the lawyers. I got something to see if he can help me out with. All right. Well, he brought the boy out, and he said, listen. I sold some coffee. This guy owned a coffee mill here in Key West, Pepe Pelay, and he owned a coffee mill there next to where the Chevron station is now. Roast coffee and everything. He said, man, and I sold the Star Cafe $12 of coffee. But when I went to collect my money, they told me, no, the coffee's no good. It smells bad. It's burnt. We're not paying you. He says, it's $12. This is 1931 or whatever the case. And so he says, all right, well, let me see if I can help you with this. So he gets a friend of his. The guy's name was Cuco Bovo, and he was a silly guy around town. He was silly, And they dress him up in different ways. The Cuco Bovo was a character, But you could get him to do things, You could get him to steal a chicken, or you could tell him to, take some fruit off a tree. He'd do any damn thing for a few dollars. Well, lawyer boy asked Cuco, he said, listen, I want you to go down to that coffee shop, and I want you to order a big cup of coffee. And you have it, and then you tell them how delicious it is. He says, and then you tell me what they tell you. So he goes down, Cuco goes down there, and he combed his hair, because he never, but that day he combed his hair, and he sat down, and he ordered the coffee, and they brought the coffee out, and he drank that coffee up, and he said, man, that's a good cup of coffee. He says, the guy at the Star Cafe said, the best coffee there is. This coffee comes from Pepe Pelaya and coffee mill. Man, Cuco says, okay, good. He said, oh, best coffee, all right. So he goes back and tells lawyer boy, and lawyer boy, he says, we got him. He goes there, and he says, you just told Cuco that's the best coffee? You owe that man $12? So he paid up. He compromised, and he came up with the solution. Took Pepe the $12, but Pepe gave him 50 cents. He said, here, that's for him. Man, and he put that in his pocket, and he was like amazed. Well, the word got around town, so people would take him, a dispute about a bicycle or a dispute about this. And, and people would come and give him 50 cents, 25 cents. And everybody said, that boy he's like the best damn lawyer there is. He was 17 years old, 18, but he fell in love with this girl. And I think her name was Maria or whatever. And but I don't know if she liked him very much, but he fell. But then the Second World War breaks out and drafted Key West boys, and nobody thought he would go to jail because to war because he was little. They thought he wasn't too smart. But anyways, he got drafted. And not only did he get drafted, he got sent to Europe. He got sent to England, and then he was in Normandy. And he got frostbite and in France or whatever. But he made it back to Key West, and people were amazed. They said, how the hell did he make it back, that guy? He made it back. But when he got back, it wasn't the same. And so the old man had been telling me the story. By the way, his nickname was Rags. Rags. He always had a rag. And it might have been a handkerchief, but he always had a rag in his pocket. And everybody called Rags. And so comes back, and it wasn't the same. I guess the chief judge had left or new laws, and the new judge told him, listen, no more practicing law like you do, whatever. You can work around here, but you can't. And then he found out that his girlfriend had gotten married to a sailor and left Key West, so he was brokenhearted, and he was. And so Rags was telling me the story, and I was getting ready to ask him, whatever happened to Lawyer Boy, but I heard somebody call Rags, and so he said, I gotta go, gotta fix their mess. One of the attorneys called him, and he left. So I worked there a few more days, and we talked about stuff, and from time to time I'd hear, somebody, Rags, and he'd get up and go. And so come to work one day, I said, listen, and his name was Albert. I said, Albert, today's my last day. I just wanted to come over here and tell you, I'm going to go back. They're going to send me back to Stock Island and work over there, but it was nice meeting you. And he says, listen, there's a bag there, like an old Fausto's bag, and put something in there for you and stuff, and take that with you. And then somebody called Rags, and he said, I'll see you later, and he walked out. So I went home, and I was telling my mother about it. I said, the guy that works, the older guy, oh, yeah, he's kind of silly. I don't know, he might even be crazy. I said, Mama, just because people aren't so friendly, and they're not crazy. He said, yeah, but he's odd, So, yeah, well, he gave me this bag, and I pulled out, and there was a note, handwritten note, like a letter. And he wrote to me and told me how nice it was to have met me and stuff. And he told me, in the letter, he says, explained to me what he had seen around the courthouse. He's seen people get married and start their lives, and people get divorced, and he saw different things happen there, and he saw great injustice. But he wrote, but for every great injustice, there is great justice. And it was beautifully written. I said, damn, Rags wrote that. So I said, let me go down there and see if I can find him. Go down to the courthouse and see these two lawyers. They were walking in. I said, hey, let me ask you a question. The guy that was working, he worked here and stuff, still around? He says, I think he might have retired or left or whatever. I said, oh, shit. I said, well, let me ask you another question. I said, he told me the story about this guy named Lawyer Boy. He says, oh, yeah, Lawyer Boy, of course. And says, what happened to Lawyer Boy? He says, well, the guy that you've been having lunch with, Rags? He said, that's Lawyer Boy. I said, yes. That's Lawyer Boy? That's Lawyer Boy. Crazy. So he tells me, the one lawyer turns to the other one and says, that Rags, that Lawyer Boy, was probably the best. And he stopped. He says, no, hell with that. I'm the best attorney in Key West. And the other one says, no, I'm the best attorney in Key West. So they went off arguing. Years later, I was around the city cemetery. I was going to go do something over there or something, and I had parked the truck. And sometimes that's how I find these things, and I find these little gems. I found Miami's headstone, Leopoldo Armas. And damn if they didn't put Miami underneath it. And I took a picture of it, And so this one day I was there, and I see this headstone. And I'm looking, and it says Albert Nevelinas Diaz, and A-N-D. And I said, that's got to be Rags. That's got to be Lawyer Boy. So I went to the truck and I got some, duct tape and a permanent marker, and I put a piece of tape on that headstone. And I wrote, the best damn lawyer kids. He had wrote that handwritten letter for me and stuff, and I brought something here tonight, so I want you all to see it. It's falling apart, but Rags told me, he said, Wayne, with a briefcase and a pocket full of dreams, you can do whatever you want in life. So I appreciate that. I was young. I was 18 years old, 1978. That's some of the stories that I have tonight. We have Yankee over here, and Yankee was he was one of the founders of the Southernmost Point, Soul Conchs, and great fisherman, but even a better storyteller. And he told me a story about one time he had 2 marlins and sharks around him, and boat had water on it, and he had them on hand lines. I said, Yankee, hand lines? He said, you damn right, I was bringing them. So I had to choose which one I wanted, so. Which one did you get? Of course, the bigger one, so. Yankee was Yankee's son, Bishop Key. He's the one that the statue's at the Southernmost Point and he's blowing the conch shell. And Bishop Key was a man of God, and he was a bishop. And so when the city decided to do that, I believe that the city said Bishop Key, because Yankee was a rascal. Yankee was a ladies' man. He was a drinker. He was a gambler. How the hell are you going to put Yankee on the southernmost flag? But he was a friend of mine. So yeah, I told Corey I'd try to keep this, but I have, one more. And do we have the last great rooster fight? And I'll tell you that one. Last great rooster. I did this carving some years back. And again, this is, after I got out of high school, probably 1979 or 80. And there was a club here on Duval Street. It was called the Fitzgeralds. And where the La Concha is, and you drive up in there, well, the club was right there. It belonged to the Spotswoods. And what a nightclub. It was amazing. Back then it was disco, and we'd go dancing. And, I used to take my girlfriend, and no, you were a little bit too young. It was another girlfriend. That's my wife. But one night we were in there drinking, and there was smugglers in Key West, and there were gamblers, and we were drinking, everybody, and they started arguing about roosters and what was the best rooster and what was not. And one of the guys says, that old rooster pen over there on Amelia Street is still there, the rooster ring. He said, let's all go. Let's go now. Let's go grab the darn roosters and let's go. We all got up. We were drunk any damn ways. We all got up and we started walking down to Wall Street in our platform shoes. And by the time we got there, it was sunrise. And they brought two roosters. I don't even know if it was the two roosters they were talking about. It's probably two roosters they found on the street. And they threw them there, and everybody was gambling. And, I've got the chief of police showed up, a couple of gangsters. Some lady brought out tamales, and she started selling, And the guy with the number 13 on, they got rid of him quick. They said, "Hey, get out." But that rooster place was called was the Cuban American rooster ring, and it was dilapidated by then. But so that's the last time that I know of, and that would have been 1979, that there was ever a illegal or whatever rooster fight in the city of Key West. So I call this carving the last great rooster fight. So thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming tonight. I enjoyed it. And I'll use my briefcase. Thanks.